History of the Nepali Army. The Nepalese Army in the National Army of Sovereign and Independent Nepal with a history of 20-50 years. The modern history of Nepalese army started with the Nepal unification campaign of King Prithvi Narayan Shah. Initially, this army was called the Gorkhali Army and transformed into the Nepalese Army. The unification battles. Nuakot, a strategic area in the northwest of Kathmandu Valley, belonged to the Kingdom of Kathmandu. King Narbhupal Saha, the father of Prithvinarayan Shaha, had tried to annex Nuakot 2 times into Gorkha, but his attempt was unsuccessful. The first attempt by King Prithvinarayan Shaha also failed, so this was really the third attempt by the Gorkha king, Kaji Kalu Pandey. The Gorkhali commander chalked out a strategy to mount a sudden attack against the defenders from an unexpected direction without giving the enemy opportunity for counterattack. When Kaji Kalu Pandey began to climb up from the north, it was dawn of the 26th of September 1744 when the defenders of Nuapot were still sleeping. The Gorkhali forces reached Mahamandal, a tactical outpost in Nuakot, a mounted surprise attack there. Sankhamani, the commander of the defenders, began to encourage his panic-stricken soldiers to stand up and fight against the Gorkhalis, but to no avail. He himself took a sword, charged forward, and wounded a few Gorkhali soldiers. He had already sustained injuries. He advanced towards Dal Mardan Saha, brother of Prithvinarayan Saha, and challenged him. Dal Mardan Saha, just 13-year-old, answered the challenge and, with a swift strike on Sankhamani's head, killed him on the spot. Kalu Pandey's plan had proved successful. Another group of Gorkhali soldiers led by Chautaria Mohadam Kriti Shaha, another brother of Prithvinarayan Shaha, crushed Dharampani but met with strong resistance. The battle continued for a while and ultimately the Gorkhali forces triumphed. The third group, led by King Prithvinarayan Shaha himself, began to advance swiftly towards Nuakot Gadhi fort after receiving news of captured Mahamandal. The death of Sankhamani had taken the wind out of the defenders' sail. They began to flee towards Belkot instead of fighting. Kajkalu Pandey reached Nuakot with a small contingent of forces. Mohadam Kriti Saha also arrived. As King Prithvinarayan Saha entered the Nuakot Gadi fortress, Nuakot was annexed to the Gorkha state. The first foothold in the process of unification of Nepal had been secured. Over the next few years, this success was followed by a deliberate and practical strategy to lay general siege on the Kathmandu Valley from all directions. Another important step in the initial unification campaign was the conquering of Pritipur, the first stage in the southern part of Kathmandu Valley. Gorkhali troops had failed twice to secure Pritipur. King Prithvinarayan Shaha changed his plan and encircled and blockaded the whole fort. A 6-long siege by the Gorkhali forces created panic among its inhabitants. The Kritipur commander on 12 March 1766 opened the gates the fort at midnight, surrendered to the Gorkhali forces. Kritipur was annexed to Gorkha without any battle. Similar blockade tactics also helped secure Makwanpur, south of Kathmandu Valley. Well-known names like Mohadam Kriti Saha, Surpratap Saha, Dalmordan Saha, Rana Rudra Saha, Nandu Saha, Kaji Bhamsharaj Pandey, Kaji Keher Singh Basnyat, Kaji Nehar Singh Basnyat, and Kaji Abhimam Singh Basnyat were dispatched with about 1,100 fighting troops to encircle the Makwanpur fortress by the dawn of 20th August 1762. King Digbandhan Sen and his minister Kanak Singh Bania had already sent their families to safer grounds before the encirclement of their fortress. The Gorkhalis launched an attack on 21st August 1762. The battle lasted for 8 hours. King Digbandhan and his minister Kanak Singh escaped and Harirapur Gadhi. Makwanpur was thus annexed to Nepal. After occupying the Makwanpur Gadhi fort, the Gorkhali forces started planning for an attack on Harirapur Gadhi, a strategic fort on a mountain ridge of the Mahabharat range, also south of Kathmandu. It controlled the route to Kathmandu Valley. At the dawn of 4th October 1762, the Gorkhalis launched the attack. The soldiers at Hariharpur Gadhi fought valiantly against the Gorkha forces but were ultimately forced to vacate the Gadhi after midnight. About 500 soldiers of Hariharpur died in the battle. The unification process by Prithvi Narayan Shaha continued after his death in 1775. The Kangra fort, now part of Himachal Pradesh of India, was kept under encirclement for 3 years during the unification battle by the Nepalese army under the command of Barakaji Amar Singh Thapa. Barakaji Amar Singh Thapa. In the years that followed the death of King Prithvinarayan Shaha, his younger son Regent Bahadur Shaha and others had succeeded in extending Nepal to Sultej River, now east in India, and beyond in the west of Sikkim and Bhutan to the east. The Kangra fort, situated on the top of a hill about 64 kilometers from the Bias River, was considered impregnable and had a great strategic and military importance. Sanchar Chand, the king of Kangra, was unpopular even among his countrymen. Amar Singh Thapa camped his forces at Jwalamukhi, from where a contingent of Nepalese forces led Singh to the Kangra fort. Sansar Chand sent a message to Amar Singh Thapa saying he intended to give up control of the Kangra fort and Taragad and hand them over to him. He asked for a period on 10 days to do so. Amar Singh Thapa withdrew his forces from the Amar Singh Thapa withdrew his forces from the gates of Ganesh Valley. But Sansar Chand was just buying time and secretly approaching Ranjit Singh of Punjab for help. Ranjit Singh, along with his 1,506 soldiers, reached the Kangra fort. Dogging the Nepalese, he launched a multi-pronged attack against the Nepalese force. The first battle was fought at Ganesh Valley, the second at Gorkha Tila, and the last at Malkanda. A French fight raged in the Ganesh Valley, where both sides suffered heavy casualties. The Singhs made a retreat but again attacked in the evening. The Nepalese forces had to give up some positions in the battle. Ultimately, a peace treaty was signed between the opposite camps. The Nepalese force had to fall back to Sultles River on 24th August 1809. The Battle of Kangra was the last of the unification battles, except for the annexion of Palpa, which was accomplished after the death of Regent Prince Bahadur Shah, defending a kingdom in the making. If the unification battles brought the bravery of the Gorkhalis into the limelight, the bravery was to be tested to the limits by the war they had to fight to preserve the fledgling kingdom. The stories that follow show how the Nepalese forces kept up their reputation even during adverse circumstances. They were almost always vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but rarely outsoldered. Battle against Mir Qasim, 1763. The fortress of Makwanpur has a historical and military significance for the Nepalese. It was here that Nepalese defeated superior forces of Mir Qasim and since 500 guns and 2 cannons. Later on, these weapons were used by Nepalese troops and 4 regular companies were established, namely Srinath, Kalibox, Bardabadur, and Sabuj. Gorkha Company was established a few months later. It was the first ranked and file system beginning the modern organizational history of the Nepalese army. The battle against Mir Qasim's troops was the first battle of the Nepalese army against a foreign power. Sardar Nandu Shah was the fortress commander of Makwanpur with 400 troops, some guns, and homemade traditional weapons like dhanu, bows, kukuri, tarwar, gutiaro, which means slingshot, etc. They devised different hit and run strategies to surprise the enemy. For instance, a night spoiling attack base was set up on the Taplankar mountain ridge. Mir Qasim's renowned warrior Gurkhin Khan commanded about 2,500 troops with cannons, guns, ammunition, and superior logistic backup. Their attack base was at the bottom of Makwanpur Gadhi Hill. They had planned a night attack. When the enemy's heavy forces marched on December 1762 and arrived at Harnamadi in January 1763, they found all the local houses already evacuated and the area short of food provisions. Makwanpur Gadi was on the top of a mountain, about 9 kilometers uphill from the Harnamadi area. Although the Nepalese had physically occupied all the fortresses en route, the enemy was able to initially push them back to the Makwanpur Gadi area. About 3,000 troops launched a strong attack on 20th January 1763, putting the Nepalese even more on the defensive. But they were totally surprised by the pre-planned spoiling attack when they were resting in Tapal Taplakhar, where Kazi Vamsaraj Pandey led a downhill attack on them, Kazi Narsingh Basnet led an uphill attack from below, then the Nandu Shah led a frontal attack. The smooth coordination among the three, leading their by now battle hardened troops in the dark of the night, led the bewildered enemy to scatter. About 1,700 of them died, and 30 Nepalese soldiers were lost in that battle. The Nepalese captured 500 rifles and 2 cannons with other military equipment. More importantly, the battle led to the beginning of a modern reorganization of the Nepalese army, defeating the Kinloch expedition 1767. King Jayaprakash Malla of Kantipur was in search of foreign military help against the Gorkhali military campaign. He decided to seek urgent military assistance from East India Company's Councillor General of Betia, Mr. Gorling, in March 1767. King Prithvinarayan Shah, for his part, sent a message to the British asking them not to help the Malla king, but The company ignored the message, and a threatening letter was sent to King Prithvinarayan Shaha to fall back to Gorkha and not to block the trade routes to Kathmandu Valley. Captain King Long, a veteran of many campaigns, was the commander of about 2,400 well armed and equipped men. He planned to advance from Patna, that is in India, to Panauti, Kabre Palanchok. Kinchong marched from Patna on 17th August 1767. But when they were marching from Dungrebas to Sinduli Gadi, the Nepalese troops launched ferocious surprise attacks from both front and rear, routing the column. Captain Kinloch managed to escape with about 1,600 men. Kinloch fell back to Janakpur with his surviving troops. He planned to launch another offensive via to Bagmati River, and the target was Hariharpur Gadi. He reorganized and regrouped his surviving troops. His second military expedition started towards Hariharpur Gadi on 20th September 1767, but the adverse weather conditions and the swelling river stalled his advance. Prithvinarayan Shaha deployed Kajiram Krishna Kumar with reinforcement at Hariharpur Gadi. When Kinloch received the news, he lost heart. He was physically restricted by the flooded Bagmati and mentally harassed by the Nepalese army tactics. With low morale among the troops, Kinloch reluctantly retreated to India, his disgrace